皆さん、こんにちは。Yuki here. In this video, I'm going to talk about dashi. Dashi has two meanings, and this video covers the second meaning. It's typical. If you haven't watched the first video, I recommend watching that before this video. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Alright, let's start learning about dashi. Dashi is usually used with noun plus dashi, and it means it's typical something. Right, so let's look at example sentences. この絵はとてもあなたらしい。この絵はとてもあなたらしい。This drawing is so you, or this drawing is your typical drawing. So, この絵 that means this drawing. とても very あなたらしい typical of you. Next example sentence. 彼はとても男らしい。彼はとても男らしい。He is so manly. 彼は he is とても very so 男らしい manly or typical man.Right, let's look at the next example sentence. 病気らしい病気をしたことがない。病気らしい病気をしたことがない。I have never had a typical illness. Right, so 病気 that means sickness or illness. 病気らしい that means a typical illness. In this case, it means pretty good sickness, not like, oh, I feel not good. It was not something like that. Maybe like, oh, I have a fever, my stomach hurts, feeling not good, and things like that. So, 病気らしい病気 is a kind of like a typical illness をしたことがない。I mean, that part means never experienced. So, 病気らしい病気をしたことがない。I have never had a typical illness. Alright, let's look at the next example sentence. 今日は春らしい天気だ。今日は春らしい天気だ。Today is a typical spring weather. 今日 that means today, 春らしい。like a typical spring. 天気 weather だ。So, 今日は春らしい天気だ。That means today is a typical spring weather. Let's look at the next example sentence. 彼は父親らしくなった。彼は父親らしくなった。Right, in this sentence, らしく、らしい was conjugated to らしくなった。This sentence means he became like a dad. He became like a typical dad.Right, so 父親らしく that means, typical dad. なった that means became. So, 彼は父親らしくなった。He became like a typical dad. Or he became like a dad. Alright, so there is another word that is kind of similar to らしい, which is yona. And today I'm going to,And right now I'm going to explain the differences between らしい and yona. So let's look at the first sentence. 彼はとても日本人らしい人だ。彼はとても日本人らしい人だ。He's a typical Japanese. So 日本人らしい人 that means a typical Japanese. Or person that is a typical Japanese.Let's look at the next sentence. 彼はとても日本人のような人だ。彼はとても日本人のような人だ。It feels like he is a Japanese person. Alright, so what are the differences between these sentences? So if you say 彼はとても日本人らしい人だ。He's a typical Japanese. That means he is actually Japanese.What about the second one? It feels like he's a Japanese person. In this case, he is not Japanese, right? It just feels like he is, but he's actually not. So that's the difference. 日本人らしい人だ. That means typical, so he's actually Japanese. But 日本人のような人だ. That means he's like a Japanese person. So he's not Japanese, and that's a big difference. Another example is this. 今日は冬らしい天気だ. Today is a typical winter weather. 今日は冬のような天気だ. Today's weather is like winter. Alright. The difference, again, it's the same. So today is a typical winter weather. So it is actually winter right now. 冬のような天気だ. Today's weather is like winter. So it is actually not winter. Alright, so I hope you can see the differences between らしい and yona. Alright, time to look at real life examples. Alright, this is a post from Twitter. This person says, 15分遅刻か。やれやれ。君らしいね。Let's look at the first part. 15分遅刻か。やれやれ。15分, that means 15 minutes. 遅刻, that means being late. And then やれやれ, that means good grief. So this sentence means late by 15 minutes. Good grief. Let's look at the next part. 君らしいね。君らしいね。Alright, so 君, that means you. But oftentimes that means, looking down, or you're younger, so kind of looking down on you. 君らしいね. So that means it's so you. It's typical of you being late. Alright, so 君 is not very polite way to say it. So you shouldn't use it unless you use, so close to someone. It could sound friendly, but that's something that you shouldn't use against someone you don't know very much. Alright, so 15分遅刻か。やれやれ。君らしいね。That means late by 15 minutes. Good grief. It's so you. Let's look at another real life example. 久々に人間らしい朝飯。久々に人間らしい朝飯。Right, so 久々, that means in a while, for a while. ね、人間, that means human. ね、朝飯, that means breakfast. Right, so the whole sentence means breakfast that looks like a human's meal in a while. I don't know what this person has been eating for breakfast, but this is a real breakfast that he has eaten for a while. Right, so 人間らしい朝飯. That part means breakfast doesn't mean typical human-like breakfast. It actually means breakfast that looks like an actual human meal. Alright, today's quiz. Translate these sentences into Japanese using らしい. First one, I haven't had a typical meal. 2, it's a childlike idea. 3, it's typical summer weather. I leave the answers in the description, so please check that out if you're curious. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next one. またね。